Happy Families podcast. It's the podcast for the time-poor parent who just wants answers now.
It comes down to a central word that I think really sums up what ADHD is about, and that is inhibition. Kids who have got ADHD don't inhibit. They don't stop themselves.
And now here's the stars of our show, my mum and dad.
Well, lockdowns are increasing around the country. We've got the ACT, Victoria, and so much of New South Wales currently locked down. A huge portion of the population and families continue to email me and jump onto Facebook and let us know that the weight is heavy. And when I say weight, I don't mean how long it is to wait for something. I mean the burden of carrying a family through COVID lockdowns. We hope that our podcast helps you with the challenges that you're facing. G'day, this is Dr. Justin Coulson. I'm the author of 6 books about making families happier, and I'm here with Kylie, mum to our 6 daughters. And Kylie, we are going to do our best today to help parents of children who are not what we call neurotypical. That is, their brains have not developed the same way that the typical child does. We're going to talk about ADHD in the podcast today.
So you've got a webinar on this topic tomorrow night.
We've had more interest in this webinar than pretty much any that I've ever done before, which is a real surprise. I didn't think that there'd be that many people, but wow, lots of interest in ADHD.
So I'm going to admit, I don't know a lot about this. I've heard the acronym thrown around all over the place.
Sure.
But I don't know a huge amount about it. I know there's attention deficit issues in here, but I don't really understand it at all. So I'm going to play the dummy today. I'm going to ask you a whole heap of questions and find out. I'm going to learn something today.
Yeah, sure. I reckon it's worth mentioning, though, even if somebody has done a psychology degree, the amount of time and content that covers ADHD and most childhood psychological or neurological disorders is very, very small, like barely gets touched at all. So even people that have done psych degrees don't know that much about it, let alone, you know who knows more about ADHD than just about anyone? Parents of kids with ADHD, because they're living it every single day. But the average parent who looks at kids that have got ADHD and says, oh, for goodness sakes, what's going on over there? Most parents don't actually know that much about it. So yeah, let's have a chat about it ahead of the webinar tomorrow night.
So what does ADHD actually stand for?
Yeah, I'm so glad you started there. So it used to be ADD, and before that, we used to call it all sorts of other things. Like this thing has been around for a couple of centuries, and it's been documented and had all kinds of different names. But what we grew up hearing about in maybe our late teens was this thing called attention deficit disorder, ADD. Now, since then, there's been more studies done, more improvements in the way that it's talked about and the way that it's considered from a psychological, neurological, behavioural perspective. And now it's called ADHD, which means...
So it's replaced ADD.
Yeah, exactly. Now, I mean, some people will still talk about how there are differences, and this is one of the challenging things. I know we haven't even gotten to the definition yet, but one of the biggest issues with ADHD is I reckon it's probably one of the most provocative diagnoses out there, and everyone's got an opinion on it, and there's so many armchair experts. So let's just really get to it. It's attention deficit / hyperactivity disorder. Attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. And what it really is a disorder. Now I want to be really careful here. There's a couple of things that we need to highlight. Some people say that it's a psychological disorder, and I'm talking about in the research. Some people say that it's a neurological disorder. This matters because if it's neurological, what we're talking about is brain anatomy. That is, the brain is structured differently. This child is born with a different brain, therefore they're not going to develop typically from a neurological perspective. Therefore, if that's the case, you have an ADHD child. But there are some people who say, no, it's not so much neurological as it is psychological, which reshapes the brain and changes the neurology. I know I'm kind of geeking out here, but if that's the case, you say you've got a child with ADHD. And the two sides will never meet. And nothing that I do or say in this podcast or even in the webinar tomorrow night is going to satisfy the people who are on one side or another. What I am going to say is it's a disorder. I'm not going to get caught up in whether it's behavioral or neurological or psychological or environmental or an epigenetic thing. From the point of view of a parent who's trying to raise kids with ADHD, we just need to know how to support the kids. And yes, sometimes if we get to the root of it, that might help. But for our conversation, I don't think it's helpful. It's a disorder that's marked by ongoing patterns of either inattention or hyperactivity and impulsivity. And that has to interfere with functioning and development.
So a child with ADHD wouldn't have attention issues and hyperactivity? They're usually one or the other?
No, and this is where it gets really, really interesting. There are 3 types of ADHD. There's the predominantly inattentive type. There's the predominantly hyperactive and impulsive type. And then there's a combined type. But increasingly, and again, this is even controversial, increasingly kids are just being diagnosed with ADHD combined. And people are saying, you know what, sometimes they're inattentive and sometimes they're hyperactive and over the top. They talk over the top. Sometimes I've been accused of having ADD as an adult or ADHD as an adult because I butt in all the time and I've got so much energy and I'm easily distracted. Now, I don't, and I'm not pretending that I do. But this is where it gets confusing because a lot of people are like, well, all kids are impulsive.
Well, it's interesting because I've had a couple of conversations with a few different teachers over the years who've all kind of acknowledged that we're kind of all got some of those tendencies.
Yeah. And it's kind of funny to joke about saying, oh, yeah, we're all a bit ADHD at times. But when you see a child who's genuinely got ADHD, you know that we're actually not all a bit ADHD. It is on a continuum. We all have some of that in us, and so do all children. But we just can't say that we've all got ADHD. It's not. You know what it really...
No, I wasn't suggesting that. I wasn't suggesting that at all, but just an acknowledgement that each of us has some of those tendencies in different areas of our lives.
And you know what it really comes down to, Kylie? It comes down to a central word that I think really sums up what ADHD is about, and that is inhibition. Kids who have got ADHD don't inhibit. They don't stop themselves. Like you say to a child with ADHD, go and get your shoes on so we can get in the car and get to school. And if you're lucky, they'll say, okay, Mum, that's if you're lucky. And then they'll sort of walk in the direction of where their shoes might be. But perhaps they'll take 4 steps and they'll get distracted by a spot on the wall or the Lego table or what's in the fridge or their sister or something. And 10 minutes later, they're definitely not any closer to having their shoes on or getting in the car. But they've found 14 other things to do.
You've just described all 6 of our children.
Right, and that's what a lot of people say, well, that's just kids. But this is pervasive. This is something that it doesn't just happen now and then. It happens all the time,
right,
in every kind of setting. And it happens at school and it happens at home. And it's just this... What happens for parents is it starts to stress them out no end because they kind of feel like they have to completely micromanage the kids. They've got to be on top of them all the time. They have to literally step them through one thing at a time and monitor them and supervise them and walk beside them and say, okay, now do this. Okay, now do that.
So based on everything that we know about children and those psychological needs, I can see that way of managing them would probably exacerbate and challenge both parent and child.
Right. So when we're talking about psychological needs, for those of you who maybe missed the podcast where we talked about this, we all have 3 basic psychological needs: a need for relatedness or connection, a need for competence, a sense that we can master our environment, and a need for autonomy.
So if I've got someone helicoptering me and managing my every move,
yes,
then there's going to be some major challenges.
It thwarts every one of those needs. I feel like you don't trust me and our relationship's bad. I feel like you don't think I'm capable and competent. And I feel like you're going to control everything that I try to do. And here's the interesting thing. When you look at what the research over the last several decades has showed about ADHD children, the focus on getting compliance from kids all comes down to things like timeout and praise and reward charts and token systems and all that kind of thing. Fortunately, the research is starting to shift, but it's just awful. And that's why I'm going to do the webinar tomorrow night.
So I'm wondering what's actually really going on for these kids. You know, you talk about there's 2 camps, that some people think it's a brain development thing and some people think they're actually born that way. It's an anatomy challenge. Is this actually just because children have a lack of intelligence? Is it a parenting issue? Is it because of the foods that we're giving our children? Like, what's the answer?
I'm going to answer every one of those things right after the break.
It's the Happy Families Podcast.
For a happier family, try a Happy Families membership, because a happy family doesn't just happen. Details at happyfamilies.com.au.
It's the Happy Families Podcast, the podcast for the time-poor parent who just wants answers now. And today we're having a little bit of a provocative conversation about ADHD. Provocative not because you and I are being,
No, it's just a provocative topic. People get really fired up about ADHD. Webinar tomorrow night. You can get all the details at happyfamilies.com.au. Just go into the shop and click on the ADHD webinar, or on my Facebook page. All the info you need is scattered all over that page. You'll be able to just click on the link and sign up for tomorrow night's webinar about raising an ADHD child.
So I acknowledged before the break that I don't know a whole lot about it at all, but I've heard lots of people who have had discussions about, this is all parenting, or this is because these kids just are developmentally lacking intelligence, or that it's all about diet and the crazy diet some of these ADHD kids are being put through because it's about all of the additives that are going into our foods.
Okay, let me put rest to every single one of those. First of all, research tells us pretty clearly that parenting can play a part in it, but I don't think that we can blame the parents for most of what's going on with ADHD. And the central reason that we can say that is because there are some parents who have, they've got twins, and one of the kids doesn't have it and the other one does have it. They've been raised in exactly the same environment, or they've got siblings and a couple of the kids do and a couple of the kids don't. And same environment, same parents, same strategy, same everything, and a couple of these kids, like the ADHD child is often called the wild child. Not always fair. And by the way, girls show ADHD differently to boys. Won't go into that now, but there are significant differences between them. So it's not parenting per se, although sometimes parenting can be a risk factor. And this is controversial again, but the research shows that ADHD is more likely to occur in homes where there is a lack of resources. Maybe there's a parent who's absent all the time. Maybe there's been some harm or some abuse or some trauma. In fact, I was speaking to a psychologist about this just the other day, and she said so much ADHD in foster care circumstances is misdiagnosed because it's not actually ADHD. It's profound and deep trauma. And so we've got all these things playing into it. We know that socioeconomic status is linked with ADHD. But, of course, there's plenty of people who don't have much cash who have still got kids that are not being raised that way. So we've got to acknowledge that. Secondly, you mentioned intelligence. Some ADHD kids are literally the smartest kids in the class. And I can point to so many people who are extraordinary global success stories. Richard Branson, Jamie Oliver, Simone Biles, Michael Phelps. I could keep on going down the list. Emma Watson, et cetera, et cetera. All of these people are superstars in their fields, and they've been diagnosed with ADHD. So we can't say that it's an intelligence thing either. It's not. There are some kids that have got ADHD who are very intelligent, some who obviously are lacking. Oh, by the way, and diet, we've got to rule that out straight away. Yes, it's important that you feed your kids healthy stuff, but ADHD and diet don't seem to have any significant correlations that are worth talking about. And what those things do, what those myths do, is they perpetuate the idea that it's the parents' fault. And that's such an unhealthy and unkind and unfair thing to say, especially in light of the evidence that we've got. What we can say is that ADHD comes down to kids being able to regulate, having a sense of the future and being able to plan for it. And they just don't inhibit. They want to do something now, and that's why they do it. That's why they've got no friends, because they always butt in. They always talk over. They always want to be heard. They always want to have the biggest say in things. That's why they struggle at school, because they can't sit still long enough to listen to the teacher or to take notes or to do their writing. That's why they struggle in so many circumstances. And by the way, when they find something that they love, something paradoxical happens. When they feel really connected to something, they get so caught up in it, so swept up in flow that you can't pull them away. And the TV or their video games is a perfect example of that. They feel so safe there. They feel so comfortable there. It just works.
I want to know quickly.
Yep.
What does the world look like to a typical ADHD child?
Oh, my goodness. Confusing and annoying and unfair. I mean, the typical ADHD child is kind of just going, can you please let me be? They struggle with school. It's not that they're lacking intelligence. They're just struggling with school because they have that focus and inhibition problem. They struggle with friends. They struggle with family relationships, especially their siblings, especially the siblings with ADHD. They often struggle with their parents because ADHD is highly heritable. A good percentage, now it depends on which research you read again, but I'm going to say between 50 and 75%, depending on the study, of kids with ADHD have parents who have got it as well. So you imagine being an ADHD parent who struggles with inhibition and struggles with regulation and struggles to think about the future and struggles to stay focused and organised and attentive, and you've got a child who's doing all of this but like on steroids because they're kids. At least you've matured and grown through it somewhat. They struggle with big emotions. They struggle with big behaviours. They struggle more than anything with self-esteem. because they're constantly being told to stop it, be quiet, sit down, you're doing it wrong. That's not what we do here. Like, that's what life is like for an ADHD child. And for a parent of an ADHD child, I mean, it's so hard.
So maybe you could give us a sneak peek on what parents will find in your webinar tomorrow night, how they might manage.
I don't even want to give a sneak peek. I want to give the whole webinar now because I say this all the time to people. I just want to help families. I know that we've got to pay our staff and we've got to pay our mortgage, and there has to be a commercial aspect to what we do, but my motivation is to help people, full stop, end of story. Tomorrow night in the webinar, I'll go into this in a lot more depth. So I'm going to give you the basic stuff now. I've got like 10 very quick basics, and I know we're out of time already, but I'll do it really fast. And then tomorrow night in the webinar, for those who are interested, I'll go through the advanced stuff. Okay, so these are the basics. The advanced stuff can be tomorrow night. Number one, you got to manage expectations, understand your child's development. You got to recognize what they're capable of, and remember that just because they're 7 years old doesn't mean that, because they're not neurotypical, so they can't do what the neurotypical kids can do. They might do it sometimes, but not all the time. You got to remember that discipline means teach, and so much of ADHD discipline is all about conformity and about getting cranky at the kids and tokens and rewards and punishments and praise and time out. And yes, you can have the gaming console. No, you can't have the gaming console. It's just not fair.
And we see that in the classroom all the time.
Third thing, got to keep it level. And when I say level, I mean we've got to be balanced as adults. We cannot parent from a place of fear or a place of anger or a place of frustration, because if we do that, we need to parent ourselves before we can parent the kids. We've got to regulate so that we can help them to do it. Number 4, when you want an ADHD child to do something, explain it in positive terms. So don't say, stop it, cut it out, don't do that. Say what you want to see instead. Say the positive behavior you want to see. Don't tell them what not to do. Because when you tell them what not to do, they've got to think about 2 things. Number 1, how do I stop doing this? And number 2, what do I do instead? If you say, here's what you should be doing, or let's go this way, or I'd like you to try this, they've already got everything that they need to just go there. Number 5, give them transition warnings frequently. Number 6, eat. Like ADHD kids, because they get so caught up in the moment, because they forget to plan for the future, and because they're so here and now and they don't inhibit or regulate very well, sometimes they forget to eat. And by the way, as a parent, make sure you do as well, because you'll be a better parent when you've got food in your belly. What are we up to? Like number 7, thank you. Set up systems. ADHD kids thrive on routine and systems, as do children who are on the autism spectrum. I'm not suggesting they're the same thing at all, but that's one thing in common. They do better when there's a system, when there's predictability, when they know what step A is and step B and step C. The next one, they love to be active. Get them moving. Exercise and outside nature, I say it all the time, is fuel for the soul. What number are we up to?
9.
Number 9, avoid information overload like I've just given you.
And number 10.
Sorry, I've got to just highlight on avoid information overload. That means that when you ask them to do something, don't say, hey, kiddo, I need you to go and grab your school bag, pack your lunch, put your uniform on, brush your teeth, do your hair, tidy up your room, and then I'll meet you back out here in 15 minutes so we can get you to school. Way too much. Like, I know some adults that couldn't cope with that, but a child with ADHD, no way. Next one, they need friends. They just need friends so much. And my final one, I've forgotten what number we're up to.
That was 10.
Oh, gosh. Well, there's more. This is the last one I'm going to mention for now. Have a great relationship with your child's teacher. Communicate with them. Engage with them. The teachers want to help. And when they see that you're trying and that you're communicating with them and you want to be engaged in your child's education and support the teacher to do their job as they support you, that will make a huge difference. I mean, there's so much more we could talk about, but we're so far over time and we need to acknowledge that we've got a webinar tomorrow night to help out. We are running this webinar. I'm running the webinar tomorrow night with a whole lot more information that extends on what we've talked about now and some really advanced stuff for parents who are struggling with children who have this very, very, very challenging set of obstacles in their life to overcome. How we can manage ADHD. That's tomorrow night. All the details on the Happy Families Facebook page and at happyfamilies.com.au in the shop. Hey, Kylie, thanks for asking the questions.
You're welcome.
And we really appreciate Justin Rawlin, our producer from Bridge Media. Craig Bruce is our executive producer. If you'd like more info about the stuff we talked about, you can find it all at happyfamilies.com.au.